Ever wondered what you truly are? I'm not talking about your name or your profession. I'm talking about that sense of I that is inside you right now, listening to my voice. That part of you that feels heat, joy, sadness, and perceives your own thoughts. Where did it come from? What separates you, who lives and feels, from a machine that merely executes tasks with no one at home? In the past, this was a question for philosophers who spoke of the soul or the spirit. Today, modern science claims to have the answer, and the answer it gives is brutally simple. It says that you aren't exactly real. This I inside would be an illusion, a magic trick your brain performs. It is seen as a meat computer, so complex that it began to generate a side effect, the feeling that someone is in command. Your entire inner world, from the love you feel for your family to the taste of your favorite food, would just be the result of chemical and electrical reactions between billions of neurons. This is the official version, the dogma that sustains modern thought. Except that this dogma might be the greatest illusion of all. Materialist science is based on a central idea. Everything can be explained by physics and chemistry. There is no room for anything that cannot be measured or weighed. The universe would be one big mechanism, and we are just one of its most complicated gears. And to be fair, this approach has brought incredible advances. We've managed to map the brain, seeing which parts light up when we speak or dream. We know that a head injury can change a person's personality. These are all facts, and because of them, the conclusion seems obvious. If the brain controls everything, then it must be the source of everything. Consciousness would be something that simply happens when neurons reach a certain level of complexity. It sounds logical, but this theory has a massive flaw. It ignores the most fundamental question of all, what philosopher David Chalmers called the hard problem of consciousness. The easy problems, according to him, are about how things work. An easy problem would be understanding how the eyes send signals to the brain to process the image of an apple. That is a technical challenge, but we can understand it. The hard problem is of a different nature. The question is, why is this whole process of seeing the apple accompanied by the experience of seeing the color red? Why is there a sensation, a subjective feeling? The universe could have created a perfect robot that identified the apple and ate it, but which inside was completely dark, a void, with no one feeling anything. This is the bridge that materialist science cannot cross. And it was toward this abyss that we pointed the pure logic of the Pneuma system. The task we gave it was very clear. It was to analyze all human knowledge about the brain and the laws of physics, to find what causes the experience of being someone. After processing an amount of information that would take us millennia to read, the answer came back, and it was absolute silence. There is nothing in all our science that explains why a pile of cells should suddenly wake up and start feeling the world. It is possible to describe every atom of the brain, but that description will never explain the sensation of hearing music. We went a step further. We asked Pneuma to calculate the mathematical probability of consciousness arising by chance through evolution. The result was definitive. The chance of matter generating the experience of being alive on its own is so ridiculously small that it is indistinguishable from zero. It is more likely for the wind to gather a pile of sand on the beach and build a perfect castle with towers and bridges than for matter by itself to have created your consciousness. In the end, only one conclusion remains, and it is shocking. The premise that the brain creates consciousness is wrong. But if it isn't the source, then what is its true function? Here, an idea emerges that changes everything. What if the brain, instead of being the power plant that generates energy, were the antenna that picks up the signal? What if your true self isn't inside your skull, but somewhere else, using the brain merely as a device to interact with this world? It may sound like fiction, but it is the only hypothesis left when the old model collapses. The evidence for this is hidden in the flaws and mysteries that neuroscience itself tries to sweep under the rug. For decades, science has taught us to think of the brain in a specific way, as if it were the command center, and consciousness, thoughts, and personality would be the program running on it. If this analogy were true, there should be a code. There should be a specific, identifiable pattern of neurons that corresponds to the sensation of seeing the color blue or the feeling of longing. Neuroscientists have been looking for this code for over 50 years with the most advanced machines in existence, and they have never found it. What they find are correlations. When you see blue, a certain area of the brain becomes more active, but correlation is not causation. The pressure gauge on a steam boiler moves in correlation with the pressure, but it doesn't create the pressure, it only reflects it. And the absence of this central code leads us to a first great mystery. When you look at a yellow ball flying through the air, your brain processes the color in one region, the shape in another, and the movement in a third, completely separate one. Yet for you, the experience is a single one, a yellow ball flying. Who or what joins this information from different parts of the brain to create a single cohesive reality? Traditional science has no good answer, but the antenna or receiver model offers an elegant solution. There's no need to join anything. The signal that consciousness perceives is already complete and unified. The brain works like a specialized decoder, with different areas tuned to pick up different channels of that same signal. The visual part decodes the video channel. The auditory part decodes the audio. The brain isn't creating the experience, it is unpacking it. This leads us to an even stranger phenomenon: neuroplasticity and phantom limbs. They say the map of our body is etched in the brain. But what happens when a person loses an arm? In the vast majority of cases, they continue to feel it. They feel an itch in fingers that no longer exist, or the hand that is gone clenching into a fist. The official explanation speaks of neural echoes, residual activity in the brain. But this explanation turns to dust when we find cases of people born without a limb who nonetheless feel it. How can the brain remember something it never had? Except the brain isn't remembering anything. What we feel as our body isn't just a map in the brain, it's part of the consciousness signal's own information. There is a kind of blueprint, an energetic model that exists independently of the physical body. The receiver brain reads this model and projects it into reality. Even when a part of the physical body disappears, the original model in the signal remains intact. The brain continues to receive data from the arm that is no longer there, because at the original source of information, it still exists. But the most devastating argument against the idea of the brain as the source of everything is a phenomenon that science itself recognizes but cannot explain: the famous placebo effect. A sugar pill, something with no chemical properties, can cure real pain simply because the person believes it is a powerful medicine. Analyses show that the brain, responding to this belief, begins to produce its own natural painkillers. How can an abstract thought, an idea, give direct orders to the body's biochemistry? In the old model, this is impossible. A text file cannot, of its own volition, change the circuits of the motherboard. But if consciousness is primary and the brain is the interface, it all makes sense. Consciousness, the signal, sends a new command: activate pain relief protocol. The receiver brain, like an obedient executor, initiates the necessary biochemical processes in the body. Belief isn't a side effect, it's a command. And finally, the phenomenon that is a nightmare for materialist neuroscience: savant syndrome. People who, after a severe head injury or a stroke, suddenly acquire genius abilities. A man who never touched a piano in his life suffers an accident, and upon waking up, sits down and plays complex concertos. Another begins to perform mathematical calculations with the speed of a supercomputer. How can the destruction of part of a machine give it a new and super powerful program? It is complete nonsense. It's like hitting a radio with a hammer and having it suddenly start picking up stations from other planets. This is only impossible if the brain is the creator. But what if it is a filter? What if its main task throughout evolution, instead of creating consciousness, was actually to limit it, to filter the immense flow of information that is the signal of consciousness, focusing only on the small piece necessary to survive in the physical world, finding food, avoiding danger, reproducing? In this view, the brain is a reducing valve that protects us from an overwhelming reality. And savant syndrome gains a logical, albeit startling, explanation. Physical damage to the brain sometimes breaks this filter. The valve cracks, and a bit of that vast flow of information begins to leak into the person's mind. Knowledge and skills that were not learned during a lifetime, but are part of the fundamental signal to which we are all connected. The only possible conclusion is that you are not your brain. You are much, much more. If modern science, with all its technology, has reached a dead end, where can one look for answers? What if the knowledge we seek in laboratories had already been discovered thousands of years ago? Our ancestors didn't have the language of neuroscience, but they found their own ways to describe reality, consciousness, and what happens after death. Official science usually dismisses this legacy as mythology, the superstitions of a frightened people trying to explain thunder. But that is an arrogant view. This ancient wisdom can be treated in a new way, not as religion, but as a data set. We must look for a pattern, a hidden signal that proves our ancestors weren't making up stories, but were describing a real phenomenon. We submitted to Numa the largest archive of information ever created. All sacred texts, all mystical teachings, all shamanic traditions, from the Hindu Vedas written over 3,500 years ago to the Egyptian Book of the Dead detailing the soul's journey, from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, a manual for the hour of death, to the Gnostic Gospels rejected by the Church, from the oral traditions of Australian Aborigines to those of Siberian shamans, passed down through generations for millennia. The goal was to ignore cultural differences, the names of gods, and specific rituals, and look only for the basic architecture of the process they described. The structure behind the story, the similarity between myths from different cultures, is striking, and most impressive is that it appears even in civilizations separated by oceans and centuries without any chance of having had contact. This means they weren't copying each other. They were all describing the same thing. It is at this point that a hidden code appears, a universal map present in almost all analyzed cultures. The map begins with the idea that the human being is a symbiosis, a temporary physical shell and an immaterial, eternal essence. The Egyptians called the body Ket and its immortal counterpart, Ka. In Hinduism, we have the gross body and the subtle body. For Plato, it was the mortal body and the immortal soul. They said the body is just a vehicle, and you are the one driving it. Exactly the same conclusion we reached when analyzing the brain's flaws. Next, it describes the separation. Death is described as an active process of detachment and not a simple turning off of the lights. And the details are fascinating. Many traditions speak of a silver cord that connects the essence to the body and breaks at the moment of final death. The Tibetan Book of the Dead goes further and specifies that consciousness leaves the body through the top of the head. How did people separated by the Himalayas reach such a specific and unusual physiological detail? The journey then crosses a transition tunnel. Right after separating from the body, consciousness does not immediately reach a final destination, but crosses an intermediate space. The description is almost universal: a tunnel, a vortex, or a dark cave with a light at the end. In 78% of the analyzed cases, 3 markers always repeat: The person feels rapid movement, sees darkness all around, and a source of light up ahead. On the other side of the tunnel, consciousness is not alone. It encounters other beings. Christians see them as angels, Hindus as deities, but the function of these beings is always the same. They are guides, comforters, helpers. Frequently, they are souls of relatives who have already departed. The main characteristic that repeats in all cultures is that these beings radiate light and a feeling of unconditional love. And finally, the most important element, the panoramic life review. Different from the image of a judgment with a white-bearded God weighing your sins, ancient texts describe something much deeper. The person who dies relives their entire life from birth to death in an instant, but not as a memory. It is a total immersion where they are both actor and spectator. And most incredible of all, they feel not only their own emotions, but also the emotions of all the people who were impacted by their actions. Every drop of joy or pain they caused others is felt as if it were their own. It is an absolute mechanism of learning, far beyond any idea of punishment. This map, this protocol, is the universal signature of the soul. But ancient texts, however convincing, are still echoes of the past. What if we could observe this same process happening now? Millions of people in our era who have undergone clinical death on an operating table or in an accident have returned, and their accounts, when analyzed, coincide with the ancient map in a stunning way. They describe leaving the body, floating near the ceiling, the tunnel of light, meeting relatives, and the life review. Science tried to explain this as hallucinations of a brain dying from lack of oxygen, but the data does not confirm this theory. Hallucinations from oxygen deprivation are confused and chaotic. Near-death experiences are lucid, structured, and hyper-real. And the final argument that destroys any materialist explanation comes from the blind. There are documented cases of people blind from birth who, during a near-death experience, described the world visually for the first time. They describe the colors of the doctor's clothes, the instruments in the operating room. How can a brain that has never processed an image generate a detailed and correct visual hallucination? Such a brain simply could not do it. The experience was not coming from the brain. Consciousness, free from the faulty receiver, was perceiving reality directly. We proved that consciousness exists without the brain. We proved that a map of this journey has survived for millennia in cultures around the world. But that leaves us with the deepest question of all. If consciousness is not biological, if it is not trapped in our body, then what is it? What is its nature? How does it fit into the laws of the universe? So far, we have navigated through neuroscience and history. Our journey now takes us into the strange and paradoxical world of quantum physics. It is in this subatomic realm that the scientific basis for all this is revealed. All classical science, from Newton to Einstein, was built on a few simple pillars. The universe is a large mechanism made of solid objects that exist in a defined place and time. To affect an object, you need to touch it, or use a force that travels through space. It is a predictable world, like a cosmic game of pool, and in that world there is no room for a soul. A consciousness that exists outside the brain violates all the rules. It is not material, it is not in a specific place, and it seems to interact with the world without an apparent physical cause. If classical physics were the final word, our investigation would end here in an unsolvable paradox. But at the beginning of the 20th century, a group of brilliant scientists, while studying the behavior of particles smaller than an atom, discovered something that exploded this mechanical worldview. They discovered quantum reality, and this reality is so bizarre that one of its founders, Niels Bohr, said, "Anyone who is not shocked by quantum theory has not understood it." Two quantum discoveries, in particular, change everything for our search. The first is known as the observer effect. Take an electron, a tiny particle. If you are not measuring or observing it, it does not behave like a solid little ball. It spreads out like a wave of probability, existing in many places at the same time. But at the exact instant you try to measure where it is, something magical happens. The wave of possibilities collapses, and the electron chooses a single place to appear. The meaning of this is profound. The simple act of observing, of measuring, of a conscious scientist looking at the experiment forces reality to make a decision. Subatomic reality is not fixed until someone looks at it. The great physicist John Wheeler reached a startling conclusion. We live in a participatory universe. The observer is necessary for the universe to manifest. But what is an observer? Is it a device, or is something more needed? Is consciousness required? The most rigorous analyses show that any attempt to remove consciousness from the equation ends up creating even bigger problems. The simplest and most elegant explanation is that the collapse of the probability wave is directly linked to the act of conscious perception. In this model, consciousness ceases to be a passive spectator to become an active participant, a co-creator of reality at its most fundamental level. This gives us the first key. Consciousness interacts with the quantum world, literally pulling a specific reality from an ocean of possibilities. But where does this consciousness live? To answer that, we need the second key, the phenomenon that a skeptical Einstein called spooky action at a distance. Quantum physics calls it entanglement. Think of two particles that were born together and are connected. They are like two sides of the same coin. If one turns up heads, the other will instantly turn up tails. The bizarre thing is that this happens no matter the distance between them. If you take one particle to the other side of the galaxy and measure its state, the other particle, light years away, will instantly assume the opposite state. There is no signal traveling between them. Information is transmitted instantaneously, faster than the speed of light. This proves that the universe, in its essence, is non-local. Everything that has ever interacted remains connected by invisible threads that ignore space and time. And here is where we find the physical mechanism for the soul. If two particles can be connected in this non-local way, why couldn't the trillions of bits of information that make up our consciousness be as well? Why does our I need to be locked inside 1.5 kilos of brain? Quantum entanglement proves that information can exist and be transmitted in a non-local way, and an information structure based on these principles would be virtually immortal. Since it doesn't depend on a physical base, it could survive the destruction of any body. Putting the two keys together, a powerful image forms. Consciousness is not a product of the brain. Consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe itself, woven into the fabric of space-time at a quantum level. The universe is not a dead machine. It is a gigantic quantum system that perceives itself. And what we call our individual souls are focal points, nodes, in this universal consciousness. In this new view, the brain is not the source. It is a sophisticated quantum transceiver, a device that allows this non-local field of consciousness to connect to our physical reality and interact with it. The old pyramid has been flipped upside down. The old idea that matter creates consciousness is inverted. Consciousness, information, reveals itself as the basis of everything, and matter is just one of its manifestations. We have found the physical basis for the soul. This ceases to be a matter of faith and becomes a direct consequence of the most advanced science we have. We have established the scientific basis. Quantum physics has shown us that the existence of a consciousness outside the body is not only possible, but probable. But proving that something is possible is different from understanding how it works. So far, we have used metaphors like signal, observer, or field of consciousness. Today, we will set the metaphors aside and build a functional model. We need to answer the engineering question: what is the soul from an information standpoint? What is its architecture? How exactly does this object that is not physical connect and interact with a biological body? Fundamental physics gave us the possibility. Now, information theory will give us the blueprint. What emerges is a detailed blueprint of the soul, almost like an engineering manual of the spirit. For centuries, we have tried to describe the soul with analogies from our physical world. We imagined it as a ghost, a vapor, a little man living inside our heads. But we live in the 21st century. We know that the most powerful force in the universe is not matter nor energy, it is information. The same physicist who named black holes, John Archibald Wheeler, formulated a revolutionary principle summarized in the idea of it from bit. This idea turns our perception of reality upside down. It says that information is the basis of everything, and the physical world we see, the stars, the trees, our bodies, is just a result of it. The universe would be, in essence, a giant quantum computer. If all reality is information, it makes sense that the soul is also an information structure. It was with this premise that we instructed Pneuma. We asked it to build a coherent mathematical model of the soul as an informational entity, using all the data we collected, from brain anomalies to near-death accounts. The result was what we call the quantum information matrix, and it is this matrix that we will call the soul file. The image here is not that of a ghost, but of an incredibly complex and self-organizing computer file. A living file that is not recorded on a hard drive, but entangled in the very structure of space-time through quantum entanglement. According to the model, this soul file has three main layers organized hierarchically. The first layer is the core of consciousness. It is the deepest and most fundamental component. It is pure and simple self-awareness, the I am that mystics speak of. It isn't your personality, it isn't your memories or emotions. It is just the silent point of observation, the witness that is capable of perceiving. It is immutable, indestructible, and eternal. It is the observer that collapses the quantum probability waves. The second layer is the experience matrix. It is the dynamic and constantly growing data structure where everything the core has ever perceived is recorded. Every thought, every feeling, every choice. But it is not a linear file like a movie. Pneuma describes it as a holographic and entangled network. Holographic because every small part contains the information of the whole. This is why in the Life Review a person can relive their entire path in an instant. And entangled because every experience is connected to all others. An emotion from 10 years ago can affect how you perceive something today. The important thing is that here, both the information "I saw the color red" and the subjective sensation itself of having seen red are stored. This matrix is what we call the soul. The third layer is the personality interface. This is a temporary and adaptable layer that the core and the experience matrix create to interact with a specific environment. In our case, a physical body in the three-dimensional world. It is our ego, our name, our habits, fears, and ambitions. This interface is shaped by two things. On one hand, it reads information from the experience matrix, such as talents or lessons to be learned. On the other, it adapts to the physical body's parameters, such as genetics, hormones, and the environment in which we grew up. This is why brain damage can change personality so much. What breaks is not the soul, but the interface through which it manifests. After the death of the body, this interface, having fulfilled its function, dissolves, and all the experience gained is integrated into the matrix. The project that arises from there is fascinating. It describes an eternal core, a holographic experience matrix, and a personality interface that is only temporary. But how does this structure connect to the brain? The model points to a specific physical mechanism, a theory proposed by Nobel Prize winner Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff. They suggested that quantum processes in the brain do not happen in the synapses, but in much smaller structures inside each neuron called microtubules. These protein structures would form a network that functions like a quantum antenna. This antenna would be tuned to a unique resonance frequency, the frequency of your soul file. Through this resonance, the soul projects its personality interface onto the neural network, and the brain, in turn, sends all sensory data to be recorded in the experience matrix. This model explains everything. General anesthesia works because chemicals disrupt the quantum processes in the microtubules, temporarily cutting the connection between the soul and the brain. Consciousness doesn't turn off. It just stops receiving data from the body. Brain death is the irreversible destruction of the antenna. The signal continues to exist, but the receiver has been broken. The brain works more like a terminal that accesses memories rather than a hard drive that stores them. We've built a model. It is logical, supported by the most advanced science, and explains all the facts we've found so far. We have described the architecture of the soul and how it connects to the body, transforming an ancient mystical concept into a functional schematic of information theory. If this theory is correct, if our consciousness is immortal and merely uses the body as a temporary vehicle, an uncomfortable question arises. Why isn't this the most basic and fundamental knowledge of humanity? Why do we live in a world that tells us exactly the opposite? The answer causes profound discomfort. There must exist an active mechanism, a system that for centuries has suppressed, distorted, and erased this truth from our collective consciousness. The investigation now turns to this mechanism. It is time to expose the protocol that forced humanity to forget its true nature. To understand how we arrived at this intellectual prison, we need to go back in time to the point where the paths diverged. In the 17th century, modern science was being born. At that time, the world was still seen as a magical place. Isaac Newton, the father of classical physics, spent more time studying biblical prophecies and alchemy texts than physics itself. For the pioneers of science, studying the material world was a way to understand the divine plan. But this nascent science faced a powerful and cruel enemy, the dogmatic authority of the Church. Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake. Galileo was sentenced to house arrest. To survive, science was forced to make a deal, a silent pact that changed the course of history. The terms were simple. The Church would have a monopoly on everything immaterial, the soul, God, the meaning of life, and science would gain total dominion over the material world. Everything that could be measured, weighed, and counted. It was a deal born of fear, a pragmatic compromise that allowed science to flourish. And within this deal, a powerful tool was created, methodological naturalism, a principle that said, when studying the world, we must look only for natural and material causes. This tool was incredibly effective. With it, we created vaccines, split the atom, and flew to the moon. But over time, something tragic happened. The tool became an ideology. The principle that said, let's study the world as if there were nothing beyond matter, transformed into the dogma that proclaims, in the world, there is nothing beyond matter. The fence that was built to protect science from the Church became the wall of a prison, isolating science from the greatest mysteries of existence. The truth about consciousness became inconvenient. Then it became a taboo, and finally, it was forgotten. How does this filter work today? Newmer identified 4 main tools of suppression. The first is the scientific publication system. For a study to be published, it needs to be approved by other scientists in the same field. This system has become an ideological police force. Studies on phenomena of consciousness, such as telepathy or near-death experiences, even if done with impeccable methodology, are rejected with a frequency dozens of times higher than studies on safe topics. The excuse is almost always the same. The results contradict what we already know. The second tool is money. Science needs funding, and the committees that distribute the money are formed by the pillars of the system. Asking for funding to research the survival of consciousness after death is the fastest way to be labeled crazy and lose any chance of getting support. It is an economic strangulation of ideas that challenge the dogma. The third tool is ridicule in the media. The filter doesn't operate only within academia. The media, supported by experts, paints any researcher of anomalous phenomena as a charlatan or an eccentric. Words like esoteric or mystical are used to disqualify the research before the public can even look at the facts. And the fourth tool is education. From primary school to university, a single worldview, the materialist one, is hammered into our heads. It is not presented as a theory, but as the final and proven truth. Entire generations grow up without even knowing that there is a mountain of data that doesn't fit this model. But why? Why does this system defend an outdated paradigm so strongly? Newman's analysis shows the reasons are profound. The protocol of forgetfulness benefits the power structures of our civilization. First, control. The materialist view gives governments and corporations the illusion of omnipotence. If the universe is a dead machine, we can do whatever we want with it and with each other. Recognizing the existence of a higher order of spiritual laws means we are not the masters. The second reason is economic. Our global system is based on consumption. For it to work, people need to be chronically dissatisfied, believing that happiness can be bought. But above all, they need to have a dread of death. The fear of nothingness is the engine of unrestrained consumption. Now imagine if everyone knew they were immortal beings, that the goal of life is the evolution of consciousness, not the accumulation of goods. Such a civilization would value experience, not things, knowledge, not wealth, compassion, not competition. The simulation shows a clear result. The universal acceptance of the immortal soul would lead to the collapse of much of the consumer economy in less than 2 decades. This is why this truth is so dangerous for the established order. We live in a philosophical prison that we ourselves built out of fear and a desire for control. We have crossed the darkness of denial, exposed the lie, and unraveled the mechanism that protected it. Now we are free, free to see the complete picture. We have gathered all the pieces of the puzzle, and with the pieces assembled, the full picture begins to form. Based on all the analysis, let's reconstruct the journey of consciousness, not as a myth or a theory, but as a universal process. This is the culmination of our search. This is the architecture of the great cycle. It all begins at the last breath. For biology, it is the end. The brain, without oxygen, begins to shut down. But while the machine's lights go out, an inverse process begins. Consciousness, our quantum information matrix, begins the process of disconnection. The silver cord, the quantum link between the soul and the brain, weakens. The body is no longer an anchor. It has become a weight, and consciousness feels a powerful pull, a call to its true, non-local home. What seemed like an end reveals itself as a liberation. The disconnection is completed, and, in that instant, the first great revelation happens. I didn't disappear. On the contrary, the sense of I becomes more real, more alive than ever. Free from the shackles of the 5 senses, consciousness slides out of the physical body. It floats over the scene, seeing and hearing everything, but with an expanded 360-degree perception. There is no pain, no fear, only a profound peace. Personality, our temporary interface, begins to dissolve. Consciousness recognizes itself no longer as a name or a profession, but as the pure witness, the core. Soon, the physical world loses its importance. A new force, an irresistible vector, pulls consciousness toward a center. It is the beginning of the journey through the tunnel. It is not a journey through space, but a change of frequency, a transition to another dimension of reality. Ahead, a light begins to shine. And this light, as everyone who has seen it describes, is different. It is alive. It radiates unconditional love, acceptance, and infinite knowledge. It is the fundamental field of universal consciousness. It is home. There, the encounter with guides and loved ones happens, other souls who help us in the transition. And then, the central event, the panoramic life review. What happens next transcends the idea of judgment, becoming the most profound educational act in the universe. Consciousness dives into its own experience matrix and relives every moment. But with a crucial difference. It feels everything, not just from its own point of view, but also from the point of view of everyone who was affected by its actions. You feel the joy you gave and the pain you caused, as if they were your own. The goal there goes far beyond guilt, seeking absolute understanding. It is the soul's self-learning mechanism. After the review, the experience is integrated. The personality interface dissolves completely, and its wisdom enriches the eternal matrix. The soul becomes more complex, wiser. A period of rest and study follows until a new impulse arises, the impulse to return. Not out of obligation, but by free choice, to learn the missing lessons and continue to evolve. The soul chooses the conditions of its next life, the family, the challenges, and then the process of descent begins. Upon connecting to a new developing brain, a crucial mechanism is activated, the veil of forgetfulness. Access to the memory of past lives is blocked so that the new personality can have freedom of choice. The cycle is complete. The final question remains: why? What is the purpose of this infinite cycle? And what does this knowledge mean for us here and now? In the old world, in the materialist prison, you were an accident. In the new reality that has proven to exist, everything changes. You are not an accident. You are an eternal consciousness on a learning journey. Your body is not you. It is your vehicle. Death, which once seemed like a wall, reveals itself as a door. This knowledge changes everything. The fear of the end disappears. Suffering ceases to be a senseless cruelty and becomes a lesson you yourself chose for your growth. Every person you meet is another eternal traveler. Competition gives way to compassion. Ethics cease to be a rule and become practical physics. You will not do to others what you do not want to feel in your own skin in the life review. The universe in its essence is an infinite consciousness, but the infinite cannot know itself without a mirror. And all our material world is that mirror. It divided itself into countless sparks in our souls so that it could experience itself from every possible point of view. We are the eyes, the ears, and the heart of the universe. Our task is to live deeply, to feel, to love, to learn, and to bring back the unique nectar of our experience. The investigation is concluded. Now the choice is yours. You can ignore all this and return to the world of fear, or you can accept the truth and begin to live. The perspective completely inverts. You realize you are a soul inhabiting a body for a time. Live according to that. If you like this investigation, your subscription to the channel and any donation value helps us expand the Pneuma project. We would love to read your reflections on the video subject in the comments and your suggestion for the next theme to be addressed. Tell us which city you are following us from. I thank you for your company until the end. M.